The 7th chapter. This chapter is about prophecy. But along the way, the Rambam clarifies some other very important ideas as well. And he titles the chapter Barriers and intermediaries between people and HaKadosh Baruch Hu. He says, you find very often in Midrash and Haggadah, which I guess is the Aggadic portions of the Talmud. Some of them are in the Talmud. That there are some prophets who see Hashem from behind many barriers. And some of them see him from behind only a few barriers. And this idea of many barriers or few barriers is determined by how close they are to HaKadosh Baruch Hu and the quality of their prophecy. So we're talking about closeness to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Obviously, that would have to be explained. What does it mean, closer and further away? And since it's two factors, it means you can be very close to HaKadosh Baruch Hu and yet not have a high-quality prophecy. Indeed, we said this already. You can be very close to Kodesh Baruch Hu, you can prepare yourself perfectly for prophecy, and have no prophecy at all. The decision of a Kodesh Baruch Hu to give prophecy to someone is dependent upon factors that we can't calculate. So the closeness does not determine that he will have any prophecy, certainly does not determine that he will have a high-quality prophecy. So there are two, and that means, and even if well, see, can you actually work it the other way? Even if the quality of the prophecy is high, if he's not high, I don't know how it would work that way. Can't imagine if you have a high quality prophecy, I think that by definition would mean there are very few barriers. But he states this. It's not just A, but A and B. But B alone might be enough. I'm not sure. I don't think he says anything about it in the chapter. So, this distinction of many and fewer barriers is carried to the extreme that with Moses, it says, he saw HaKadosh Baruch Hu behind one clear barrier. And by clear, he says, I mean transparent. So then you have to ask, if the barrier is transparent, what's it doing there? And this is the statement that you have in Yevamos, that Moshe Rabbeinu istakel ba'aspaklaria ha'me'ira einayim. Moses looked through a partition which is bright to the eyes. And he says the word spaklaria there means the thing that you see through, because it's a transparent body, like glass. Also shoham, not quite sure what shoham is, some kind of material, but like glass, when you see through glass. As it says in the chapters, the Mishnah and Kalim. So now, what are we talking about? And he says the intention of this statement is what I'm about to tell you. We already explained in the second chapter that there are certain ma'alos, that is, desirable qualities that a person can have, and some of them are logical qualities, and some of them are character qualities. When it's character, we would call them virtues. When it's logic, It means intellectual gifts, intellectual, valuable intellectual qualities. And defects in a person will be of both types also. There'll be intellectual defects like foolishness and crookedness in thinking and difficulty of understanding. And you have defects in character traits like excessive desire, which I think we need here, desire for pleasure, and pride, and anger, and rogas and kas, I guess there's two different words in Arabic for different types of anger, and azus is a kind of brazenness, is what we say in English, a kind of brutish disregard for anything else, and a great desire for money, love of money, and similarly, and they are very many. The defects of character are very many. Okay, so now he's saying that these defects, both logical defects and character defects, are what separate us from HaKadosh Baruch Hu. We spoke about this in the 4th chapter. These defects are the barriers that separate us makes the person from HaKadosh Baruch Hu. And this is what the prophet said in Yeshaya, Ki im avonosechem hayu mavdilin beinechem ulevein Elokechem. Your transgressions are what divide you from your God. Now, one could perhaps question what's being said here. Let's see now. He's talking about defects of intellect and defects of character. He quotes a verse from Yeshaya which says, your transgressions separate between you and the Kodesh Baruch Hu. How do you get from transgressions to defects? Now, why would they be qualified as transgressions? So, in the case of character defects, there's a mitzvah to perfect your character. It's one of the 613 commandments. Some learn it from that the commandment of Dovid Kabbalah, you have to have the dveikus in the Kodesh Baruch Hu. Others to be like him. Rambam has in the Mishnah Torah a whole section called Hilchos Deos, which are the laws of developing character traits, for which you have a responsibility. So, what shall I say about the verse in Yeshaya? When it says your sins separate you from HaKadosh Baruch Hu, I can't imagine he thinks it means that only character failures separate you from HaKadosh Baruch Hu. I can't imagine he thinks that it's only that, but not violating Shabbos and not murder and not cheating the widows and orphans and so on and so on. Doesn't separate you. But it will include that. It will include that because you have a responsibility to perfect your character. So if you have bad character traits, that means that you have a religious failure. That's a religious crime. So that being the case, it's certainly going to include that. Now, the case for intellectual demerits is a little more difficult, because the question is to what extent intellectual demerits are in your hands, have the ability to change them. So, I think that you just have to apply the verse in Yeshaya to the extent to which you can affect your intellect. And of course, everybody knows that training can affect your intellect. And some people invest more in training, and some people invest less in training. So if you had the opportunity and had the resources and didn't invest in it, then your intellectual weaknesses would be your own fault. And then that would also be something which would be a barrier between you and the Kodesh Baruch Hu. So these two sorts of failures, defects, are the barriers that stand between a person and the Kodesh Baruch Hu, and that's what we're talking about, more barriers and less barriers vis-a-vis a prophet. But now they're not equal. This is absolutely crucial. The intellectual barriers have one requirement, and the character barriers have a different requirement. This is very important to know. He says, you should know that every prophet cannot have prophecy until he acquires all of the intellectual virtues, all of the intellectually positive traits, all of them. And most of the character perfections, most of them. And the most importance of them. But he doesn't have to be perfect in character. He must be perfect in intellect, but he does not have to be perfect in character. Now, as you'll see shortly, he has a proof of this, at least for the part of character, but it's not obviously clear what the explanation for it is. But it's very important that the two of them are different. And this is expressed in the dictum that you have in the Gemara, which says, "Ein nevuah shora ela chacham gibor v'ashir." So, nevuah only applies to someone who has three qualities: chacham, which is some kind of, well, I'll tell you what Rambam means by chacham in a second. Chacham, wisdom in some sense. Gibor has some kind of might, and ashir has some kind of wealth. So first he says, chacham means he has all of the desirable intellectual qualities. Without doubt, he says, all of them. Now you think, wealthy and mighty, what's that? Why would Chazal say that a person has to be wealthy and mighty? Well, you have to understand what wealth and might are. He says, what they mean by the word wealth is one of the virtues of character. That is to say, your ability to be satisfied with whatever you have, even if it's a small amount. Histapkus. Istapek can mean you have enough. Because the Chazal called histapkus, this ability to be satisfied with enough. This, you know me already. I was trained in mathematical logic. When I pick a word, I try to pick my words very precisely. I didn't say he makes do. I didn't say he doesn't rebel. I said he's satisfied. He's actually satisfied with the little that he has. Because they call histapkus osher. That's whom they call wealthy. And this is stated explicitly in Pirkei Avos, this is the introduction to Pirkei Avos. Ezu ashir samech b'chelko. Who is wealthy? Someone who rejoices in his portion. Then he says, that is to say that he is satisfied with what the time has provided for him, and he's not in pain of not having what was not provided to him. Now, I find this difficult. I've asked this question to many people, and I haven't gotten an answer that I can understand. Seems to me that the phrase satisfied with a little is very different from the phrase rejoices in his portion. I think they have very different meanings. And the Rambam is using them back to back here. Satisfied with little means I don't long for what I don't have. Maybe if I had an opportunity, I would get more. I would be thankful for having more. But when I go to bed at night, when I have, I'm happy with what I have. I'm satisfied. I'm satisfied with what I have. The contrasting phrase doesn't talk to me about I'm being satisfied. It talks about being joyful. Sameach. Number one. And number two, it qualifies what I have as my portion. Now, the difference between a little and my portion is the difference between a comparative statement and an absolute statement. The amount that I have is a little only if there are people who have more. Otherwise, if everybody has the same, you don't call what I have a little. So a person who says, I'm satisfied with the little that I have, is mentally comparing himself with others, realizing that others have more, but it doesn't bother him. When you describe someone as Sameach B'chelko, he's not comparing himself with anybody else at all. This is my chelik. It was chosen for me, and I want to read into it. It's my chelik because the Kodesh Baruch Hu gave it to me. Not the Times provided it, as the Rambam says anonymously here, as if it happened by itself. Unless the Rambam just doesn't want to discuss the fact that it comes from the Kodesh Baruch Hu. But the phraseology is very different. So I wouldn't use them back to back. I think they have two different meanings. But the Rambam is using them as synonymous, and given the list of character defects that he mentioned before, one of them was Ahavas Momo, to have an overly great love of money. So this person obviously doesn't have that. So this is a virtuous character trait. That's one. And what is Gibor? He says, this is someone. It's one of the character virtues. That is to say, he what's the word I want? In a hill. He's
director.
Sorry.
Director.
Like director or he's organizing and managing. He's managing the capabilities that he has using his mind, like we saw in the previous chapter about going to the middle course, right? As he said in the 5th chapter. And it says in our sources, who is the Gibor? The one who conquers his own spirit. Okay, now let's just reflect. Chazal said you need 3 things. One is to be a chacham. The Rambam says chachma includes all of the intellectual virtues, so to speak. Then it says 2 things. He should be able to be satisfied or rejoice in what he has. He doesn't have overwhelming desire for money, so he's disappointed, dissatisfied, angry, upset, and so on and so on. Okay, that's a virtue. And he conquers his spirit so as to do what's appropriate, even if his spirit is not right, if his spirit is going in the wrong direction, or he organizes his character according to the middle way. But Chazal make it into 2 things. So is this meant to say he has perfect character? Doesn't sound like it. Sounds like 2 out of a larger group. Because if you were tempted to say that the second one, that he conquers his spirit and organizes his character according to the middle way that he said in chapter 5, if you were tempted to take that as a general statement meaning character perfection, then you wouldn't have put wealthy separate as being able to be put up with a minimal amount of money or rejoice in his portion. You wouldn't have made that. That would have been one of the ones that's on the list of the other ones. So obviously he's not seeing it that way. So he's seeing in the Chazal that when it comes to the intellect has to be perfect. But when it comes to the character traits, it doesn't have to be perfect. That's what he sees in that Chazal. And he's going to prove it with examples. Now, I just want to mention, when the Rambam says Chacham, he has his own concept of Chachma. For one thing, he calls, in the Moreh Nevuchim, in the guide, he calls Moses Adon HaChachamim, the greatest of the wise, or Chacham, the greatest Chacham. So, you think, wait a minute, I'm familiar with Moses being the most supreme of the prophets. That's one of the 13 principles that the Rambam wrote down. We started with a few weeks ago. But Adonai Chachamim? And it seems to me, I remember something about Solomon. That wasn't Solomon called Vayech Kam Shlomo Mikol Adam? That he became wiser than every other person? So how could the Rambam say that he's Adonai Chachamim? And he says it twice. And he himself asked the question from Solomon. And he says, if you look carefully at the context there, it says that Solomon was wiser than all the other people in his generation. Because after it says he was wiser than everyone, he gives names. Wiser than A, B, and C. Well, if it's everybody, from the beginning of time to the end of time, you don't have to give examples. So he says, no. Moshe Rabbeinu. Moses was the one. So you say, okay, fine. There's no proof against him from Shlomo. But where did he get it from? Well, he got it from a Gemara in Megillah, thank you. It's an open Gemara. Because there it says, Moshe Rabbeinu was Av b'Torah, Av b'Nevuah, and Av b'Chachma. Av meaning the greatest. The greatest in Torah, the greatest in prophecy, and the greatest in Chachma. So the Gemara says it. So the Rambam doesn't have to apologize for saying it. Now the question is, what is Chachma? And the surprise in that Gemara, again, it's a Gemara. The surprise there in the Gemara is that Torah is one thing and Chachma is something else. What does that mean? You hear people say, if Solomon was wiser and he had all these things that he figured out, he must have figured it out from Torah because Torah is the only source, and so forth and so on. Well, the Gemara Megillah would be pause for thought. The Rambam says that Torah is what you receive as from the tradition. You're taught by your teachers, and you learn it. And Chacham is the ability to subject it to reason. I'd say rationalize as a bad connotation in English. It means to prove the things that can be proved, and give evidence for the things that we give evidence, and to define the things that should be defined. It means you can intellectualize what you received from the tradition. That's called Chachma. So, since that's his definition of Chachma, it fits very well here for him to say that the word Chacham means to have all of the intellectual virtues. Because that's what Chachma is. Chachma is using the intellect to explain, to define, and to verify the things that you have received from tradition. You have a question?
No, that's the commentary, I think, with Eeyore. I can hear, but now I can see. At first I could hear, and then now I can see.
Oh, okay. So that's exactly what he brings.
Yeah.
That's what he brings. He says at the end of the book of Job, he says, I had my problems because I heard you with the ear, which the Rambam says means I listened to the tradition, and I didn't understand it. But now I've seen you with the eye, which means I understand what the tradition means, and therefore I have no more questions. And that's a gigantic thing that he has 2 chapters in the third part on the. I have that in the book that I'm working on. Yeah.
So this quality of bringing down information in a certain way that it could be transmitted, that's the expression of Chokhmah, right? And that's why Moses it's together with Nevuah, Chokhmah, and because he brings down Nevuah, and he has the Chokhmah to
well, now let's be careful. Let's be careful now. Remember, the 3 of them are Nevuah, Torah, and Chokhmah. And Torah is what you receive from tradition. So, the first thing that Moshe Rabbeinu did is communicate to us what HaKadosh Baruch Hu told him. Mm-hmm. That's just Masorah. That's Torah. Chokhmah is, as the Rambam says, the ability to analyze, and to define, and to verify to the extent which the human mind can do that. Now, it could be that we're now in Parshas Truma, but last week we had Parshas Mishpatim. And the Mishpatim, it says, Eil Mishpatim shetasim lefneihem. These are the Mishpatim that you should place before them. And Chazal say, like a set table, teach each thing with its reason. I don't know that the word reason there is limited to what HaKadosh Baruch Hu taught him was the reason. I would assume, especially from the Roman's point of view, it means that Moshe Rabbeinu used his reason also to analyze and define and verify the things that he was told. And indeed, there's a Gemara that says that Moshe Rabbeinu practiced charity with the Jewish people. So the Gemara says, charity? Where did he do that? Because he taught them Torah. Charity? He was commanded to do that. He had no choice in the matter. Because Baruch Hu told him, this is what you teach the Jewish people. No, Moshe Rabbeinu had his own pilpul. Pilpul meaning his own analysis, his own intellectual surgery that he did on it, and stitching things together and making associations and comparisons. And he gave that also. So obviously Moshe Rabbeinu had his own. There's where the Chachma would come in. Not just transmitting what the Baruch Hu told him. That's where, and then he's a Don Chachamim. Yeah.
And so would one of the main functions of the prophet be to help those who have heard the tradition see it more clearly?
That's a nice question. I don't think so. I'm not very well versed in the writings of the prophets. It's one of the things I never got to. But the excerpts that I have seen, there's very little explanation there of the deeper meanings. Okay, Yechezkel is full of the deepest expressions in verses that we have of Jewish mysticism. But the vast majority of it is exhorting the people to do a better job at fulfilling the mitzvos and warning them about the possible consequences of failure and promising them benefits if they succeed in keeping the mitzvos, that they would be supplying insight and reasoning about the mitzvos. It could be that I'm just ignorant, but I'm not aware of that.
No, that would make sense. So the prophet can see, say, the tradition better so than others, but their job isn't to get everyone else to see what they see, but for them to get to adhere to the tradition better.
I think that's right, and more than that, whatever he sees better, if there's a discussion about what should be done, prophecy is disqualified as a source of information for that judgment. We have to be very careful. It's not the prophets are disqualified; it's prophecy that's disqualified. If Yeshayahu, the Navi, comes to the Sanhedrin and says, "Gentlemen, you're having a discussion about what to do in a particular case," hold the discussion. God told me the answer. Sure. It's over. God does not tell answers to his lofty discussions. But if he says, gentlemen, I'm prepared to enter the discussion on a par. You have your ideas, I have my ideas. Let's express them and debate them and discuss them. That's fine. Because they're not using prophecy. He just happens to be a prophet. And now here's the intermediary, which is also important to put on the table. Suppose he says, gentlemen, God gave me an inspiration as to how to look at this. But of course, I'm not asking you to agree with me because God gave it to me. I'm putting it on the table for discussion. And you'll vote as you vote. That's fine also. Because, after all, in the end, where do your ideas come from anyway? Whether you call it prophecy or you don't call it prophecy, because Baruch was feeding you ideas all the time. So the question is, what's the decision process? The decision process is you put your ideas on the table with everybody else and you vote on the basis of what you understand. Okay, so it's as I say, it's not the prophet that's disqualified, but the prophecy. At any rate, what we have here is that he has to have all of the intellectual virtues and most of, and the most important among the character virtues, but not all. That's the Rambam's qualification for prophecy. And then, as we said, if he has accomplished all of that, maybe he'll get it, maybe he won't. There's no guarantee. Okay. Now he says explicitly, it's not one of the preconditions of prophecy that he should have all of the character virtues, such that there's no lack and no defect at all. Because, for example, Solomon was a prophet, because it says, "B'Givon Nira Hashem," that HaKadosh Baruch Hu appeared to him in Givon, And we found in Solomon character defects. In his case, particularly, excess desire. And we found it explicitly. And that means with respect to wives. And that's one of the activities of great excess desire. And it says explicitly, the verse says explicitly, in this respect, Solomon sinned. Similarly with King David. He was a prophet. It says, Lidi Ber Tzur Yisrael. The rock of Israel spoke to me. And we found him to be Abir Lev. He was tough-hearted. Let's put it that way. Tough-hearted. Even though he used this with respect to the non-Jews with whom he fought wars, and for executing people who rebelled against the authority of the Torah, and he was, vis-a-vis the Jewish people, very merciful. Even so, it says in Divrei Hayomim, in English, Chronicles, that Hashem didn't find him worthy of building the temple because of the great number of people that he killed. Now, you have to understand, all the people he killed justifiably. They had to be killed. But there's a difference between what you do and how you do it. There's a difference between what you do and what character traits motivates you to do it. A person may need to be executed, and you may be the executioner, but you better not enjoy it. You better not be looking forward to it. How many do we have this week? If that's the way you go to it, you're making a terrible mistake. You're not understanding what you're doing. So he was hard-hearted in a certain way, tough-hearted, and he didn't have the right attitude towards those whom he killed, and that character prevented him from building the Beis HaMikdash. Now, let's be careful here to understand the significance of this. When Solomon built the Beis HaMikdash, and then he had to bring the Aron in, and have to open the doors to bring it in, the doors were fastened shut, and they couldn't open. And Solomon prayed and asked Chodesh Baruch Hu for help, and so forth and so on, and nothing worked until he said, in the merit of my father, and then they opened up. So it isn't as if his spirit isn't there. It's that this particular character trait, this is the Rambam's explanation, this particular character trait meant he couldn't build it. It couldn't be his production, his handiwork. Right? It couldn't be his handiwork. You know, it's a little bit like. Well, let's see. Is this really parallel? No. Here it's a failure. According to the Rambam, it's a failure on King David's part. So his point is that King David had this character failure, and even so he was a prophet. So you see from Solomon and from King David that a person can have a character failure and yet be worthy of prophecy. And he's not going to stop there. Because the verse said, Lo ato sivne bais l'shmi, ki domim rabim shafachta. You're not going to build a house for my name because you spilled much blood. We have a rule that the stones out of which the altar is made must be whole. You can't fashion them in any way, because you would do that with some kind of metal tool, and the metal is what's used for weapons. And it says the sound of the metal banging against the stone should not be heard in my premises. It can't be done. So the temple has to be something where this character doesn't play a role. And in his case, he could have conducted all the wars and killed all the people who needed to be killed, and yet have built a temple if he hadn't done it with that kind of tough heart. That's what the Rambam is saying. And Eliyahu, right, in terms of prophecy, we found in him the character of anger. And even though he used it against people who denied the Torah, rebelled against the Torah, still, the Chachamim, the sages said that Hashem removed him from prophecy. And he's not was not appropriate, not worthy for other people, because he was a kanoi. A kanoi means someone who's very zealous and single-minded and willing to put everything to the purpose, to the point where he could destroy them, but again, destroy them with a character, with a psychological basis, which was too tough. You know, at the end of Eliyahu's life, there's this almost shocking scenario where Baruch Hu tells him to go out to Mount Sinai, and he goes, and he's fed miraculously on the way, and then it says that he was in a cave there, and then he was told to go outside, and then there's a great trembling of the ground, and a great wind, and a great sound, and it says Kodesh Baruch Hu is not in the wind and not in the sound. I remember the exact. I have a bunch of violent events, and then there's a still small voice, and the still small voice says, "What are you doing here, Eliyahu? Malach hapo Eliyahu." What is he doing there? Baruch Hu said he should be there, right? So he says, "I alone remain, and I'm a kanoi. I stand for Kodesh Baruch Hu, and I brook no compromise, and I'm prepared to risk my life and to remove all obstacles. I am the only one who's available." So then the whole thing repeats. All the violent disturbances, and then the still small voice. "What are you doing here?" And he says the same thing again. He repeats the same thing. So Kodesh Baruch Hu says to him, "So you're finished. You're finished. You have one last prophecy, some non-Jewish king, and then give over to Elisha. He's taking your place." They explain, because Baruch Hu was trying to say to him, "I don't want that. I don't want the violence. I don't want the shouting. I don't want the zealousness. I want a different approach. Can you change? Can you make yourself into a different type of leader?" And so Eliyahu says, "No, I can't." He says, "Okay. So then your career is finished." So there you see Kodesh Baruch Hu say that it's not what he desired, at least from then on, and Eliyahu couldn't change, so therefore he lost it. So again, you see that Eliyahu was one of the greatest prophets of all, and still, there was something in his character which was not ideal, which shows you that perfectly ideal character is not necessary for prophecy. But we're not finished with the examples yet. Shmuel. We found that Shmuel was afraid. And here I think others would disagree with the Rambam. Because Kodesh Baruch Hu said to Shmuel, "I want you to go and anoint someone as king." And this is while Saul was reigning, so it's not going to be a popular move. And Shmuel says to Kodesh Baruch Hu, "King Saul will hear and he'll kill me." So Kodesh Baruch Hu says, "You go, and when people ask you where you're going, you tell them you're going on an errand. Don't publicize what you're doing. And what you'll do in private." So there are those who say, from here you see that you have a responsibility to care for your own safety. And even if the Kodesh Baruch Hu tells you, he expects you to be concerned about your safety to the extent of asking him, instead of going blindly. And then what Shmuel did was perfectly all right. And the Sifrei Musa, it's brought down that this is the way you should do what you do. But the Rambam is pointing out that he didn't ask out of intellectual interest. Let's see now. Baruch said to go. What's in the environment? Oh, there's this and this. That. Okay, so the danger. So I'll ask him. No, he was afraid. Shouldn't have been afraid. And that being the case, this was a character failure in Shmuel. And even Jacob. Now we're pushing to the top. Yaakov. Because when he heard that Esau was coming to meet him with 400 men, and it says, Vayira Yaakov Yetzelo, and Chazal explained, he was afraid there's going to be a confrontation, and he was afraid either Esau will kill him, or he'll kill Esau. Or Esau will kill some of his people, and he'll kill some of Esau's people, but it says he was afraid. So, the Rambam is saying, fear is not appropriate. Certainly not fear of being attacked by somebody else and hurt by somebody else. One shouldn't have fear of that. So even of course, Jacob talked about prophecy, one of the greatest prophets who ever was. Moses was the greatest, but and whoever will be. In case somebody tells you differently about the Mashiach, it's not true. All our sources say that no one compares with Moses, past, present, or future. So you have a long list of people who are the greatest of the prophets, and they all had character failures. So obviously, it does not require perfect character. Now, let's see. He said at the beginning of this chapter that prophets have barriers between them and HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Some have more and some have less. And what is standing between them are failures, defects. And then he said, if you're a prophet, you have to have all of the intellectual virtues. So those can't be the things standing in the way, because you wouldn't have prophecy at all. So the barriers are only because of character defects. So now, having told us that there are barriers, and the defects are the barriers, obviously you can't demand perfection of character, because if you demanded perfection of character, there wouldn't be any barriers, because these are the barriers. Then the question remains only with respect to Moses. Because it's Moses, as the Gemara says, as Baklari Hami'ira, one barrier which is perfectly transparent, like glass, says the Rambam. Does that mean he had a defect of character? He didn't have a defect of character? Did it function? What is the idea of a single transparent barrier? What does that connote? And I'm not going to go into it now. I should tell you that the Rambam holds that the way in which Moses received his prophecy is substantially different from all other prophets. We read about the Kruvim yesterday on Shabbos, right? The figures, the gold figure of angels on the cover of the Aron Kodesh, the Ark, in the Holy of Holies. So, of course, people don't understand. Think, what? A statue? A golden statue? That's what the Babylonians said when they went into the right? These are statues of angels. And the Rambam says there are two, because no one will confuse that with the God that Jews worship, because everyone knows that we are monotheists. So if there are two, it can't be God. And he says the reason why angels are there, because angels mediate prophecy. That's where all of the connection of HaKadosh Baruch Hu to the world comes through angels. But the Rambam's position is that Moses got his prophecy without angelic mediation. So how this relates to Moses is not clear to me. So what he said up until now fits well with all the other prophets, doesn't fit yet so well with Moses. Okay, we're together? Okay. So now he says, I've told you the structure. It shouldn't be a foreign idea, a strange idea, the idea that has no intuitive appeal, that character defects should reduce a person's level of prophecy. Because we found in our sources, the Torah itself, that certain types of character defects prevent prophecy altogether, like anger. Because it says, Gemara Psachim, someone who is angry, not displays anger. You can display anger as like an actor. That's all right. There may be a person for doing that. But a person who is angry, his prophecy departs him. And they brought a proof from Elisha, where he was angry with something someone did, and he caused some people to die, and Kosh Baruch Hu took away his prophecy. And that's why Elisha had to say, bring for me musicians, and so I can recover the quality of mind that's required for prophecy. And the same thing true with Jacob, when he was mourning for Yosef, he thought he was dead for 20 years, it says he lost Ruach HaKodesh. Ruach HaKodesh is another word it's a word for a quality which is very similar to prophecy. Sometimes it's used to include prophecy. And then when he finally heard that Yosef was alive and went to meet him and embraced him, it says about Tachil Ruach, this was before that, Ruach Avihem, when they heard that he was alive, then his spirit, the Ruach, came alive again, which means in the meantime, he didn't have that Ruach. And he quotes the Targum of Onkelos. He explains that he had the Ruach Nevuah. That's what that Targum includes. Al Yaakov Avuam. And then there's a statement in the Talmud which says prophecy does not occur to a person when he's lethargic, which is the word that I would use for astus. Sometimes say lazy. It's lethargic. He has no energy, and sadness, just from a position of simcha. Now, so if you see that certain, and these are defects of character. This kind of sadness is a defect of character. Again, a defect of character of Yaakov. He shouldn't have been sad and depressed. Now, people today have a very sloppy usage. They talk about depressed, they think of taking medication and being dysfunctional. It means he didn't have the edge of joy that he should have had, and that those are defects of character. So obviously, but since you see that certain times defects of character can cause the loss of prophecy entirely, it's natural to assume that a less severe defect of character could lower the level of nevuah that you have, the level of prophecy that you have. That's why he's saying that this is not a foreign idea to our sources. What he so far hasn't mentioned is that one of the sources that they have for getting angry and losing prophecy is Moses. We'll have to see about that. When they came back from Midian, and it says he was angry at the officers because of the way in which they treated the war, and then when it came to the vessels that they had captured, that was communicated not through him. So anyway, so this is this is the introduction to the idea of prophecy, and Mr. Shem will pick it up tomorrow.